A thin drizzle fell on the desolate crossroads, swirling in the flicker of the gas street lamp. There were no pedestrians, no sounds except for the faint tinkle of rainwater dripping from the signboards. At the edge of a crumbling cobblestone road stood a small wooden theater sheeted by decades of neglect. Its once colorful facade had faded to peeling black paint that bore only a single insignia, a ragged marionette silhouette poised in a twisted dance. Katerina stood on the threshold, her boots sinking into the mud. She ran a leather-gloved hand over the door's engraved design, a swirl of vines and hidden eyes. The musty smell of rotted wood and moth-eaten curtains greeted her with a damp exhalation when she pushed the door open. Her breath caught, and for a moment she thought she heard footsteps echoing through the gloom. But all she saw were chairs stacked in corners, dusty props, and half-devoured costumes over racks. The building sighed, as if relieved to have someone inside after so long. She was not here by chance. Travelers whispered of a puppet master who once performed impossible feats in this forsaken place. Night after night, the theater sold out, enthralling the audience with shadow marionette illusions. Then, the stories went. Something happened. People vanished. The puppet master disappeared. The next morning, the wooden facade was boarded up, and rumor had it that no one dared reopen the place. But Katerina, a self-proclaimed chronicler of the arcane, had come in pursuit of the truth behind the legends. She needed to know why a mere puppet show had left an imprint of terror for generations. She dusted off her oil lantern and stepped into the cavernous hall. A labyrinth of corridors branched from the rear. Pale beams of watery moonlight illuminated velvet seats, whose upholstery was torn and leaking stuffing. Katerina advanced down the center aisle toward the stage. The stage curtains were ragged but still clung to the rails, as though waiting faithfully for the puppet master's return. She climbed the steps. The boards groaned under her weight. Her lantern revealed a swirling pattern painted on the floorboards, black pigments that glimmered like obsidian. She crouched to touch them. At first it seemed simply an elaborate design, but the curves and sigils combined into something more. They had the fluid artistry of a spell. Suddenly, a whisper coiled around her ear. She swiveled. Through the darkness something stirred. For half a heartbeat she glimpsed movement in the wings, like a figure in black gliding from one side of the stage to the other. Her entire body tightened, breath trapped. She stood, listening to the silent hush. It was only after she convinced herself nothing was there that she noticed a battered trunk at stage left. She made her way to it, brushing aside decades of cobwebs. The trunk's lock appeared to be busted, so she lifted the lid with caution. Within, half a dozen marionettes lay tangled, each with glassy eyes and hinged wooden joints. Their once finely tailored clothing, a carnival of velvets, satins, and lace, had now disintegrated into tatters. One puppet stared upward, its carved lips forming a strange grin. As Katerina reached out to touch it, a voice, smooth, beguiling, spoke through the silence. "You found them, I see." Katerina inhaled sharply and spun around. At the edge of the back curtain, a woman stood in a long black coat. Tangles of silver hair framed her face. She wore a curious expression, both amused and watchful. The lines around her eyes seemed to crackle with authority. Though Katerina couldn't be sure, she suspected that this was the rumored puppet master. "You startled me," Katerina said, schooling her voice to hide her alarm. "How did you—" "I go where I please within my domain," the woman said. She drifted closer with silent steps. Her presence was unnerving, like the hush in the moment before thunder. "Tell me, traveler, do you believe in living shadows?" Katerina's heart thrummed. "I've heard stories, but that's why I'm here, to learn the truth. You must be the puppet master." "Are you Madame Hester?" The woman inclined her head. "Hesser is one of the names they gave me. You may use it if you wish." She gestured toward the trunk. "I see you've made acquaintance with my cast. Perhaps you'd like to see them in action." Katerina felt a small chill lance through her. "I've come to see what really happened here, not just rumors. The tales speak of disappearances, of unnatural performances. Hester stepped to the trunk and gently lifted the puppet from Katerina's hands. You have some knowledge, I see. She placed the marionette's head upon her fingertips. The puppet's carved lips twitched, as though tasting the air. Did you know shadows have life? That they can be coaxed and shaped? Her gaze rested on the swirling black pattern on the stage. This place has become a sanctuary for them. Under a puppet master's skillful hand, shadows can be harnessed like silken threads. A puppeteer can breathe them into wooden limbs, granting the marionettes a darker essence. Though Katerina was brave, her knees felt weak. That's impossible. Shadows are intangible, nothing but lack of light. Are they? Hester let out a low laugh, mercurial as a whisper. Then watch. She extended her arm, letting the puppet dangle. Each wooden limb was connected via slender cords. The puppet's glassy eyes seemed to stare straight at Katerina. Rain pattered on the roof overhead. Hester closed her own eyes, and the swirling black sigils on the stage suddenly shimmered like molten ink beneath the lantern's glow. A slow ripple traveled through them, as though the design were coming alive. The puppet's shadow on the stage twitched, initially just a flicker. Then it stretched and reared upright. Darkness washed into the marionette's body. Its hinged legs stiffened, once lifeless joints crackling with movement. With a snap, the puppet's head turned. Katerina watched in sheer disbelief as the wooden lips parted in a silent grin. Alive? She murmured, stepping backward to keep distance. How? Hester opened her eyes. Shadows are the remnants of lost souls, fleeting echoes looking for a host. This stage was built upon a crossroads, an intersection of crossroads, if you will, that let me channel those lost echoes. She freed the puppet from her hand, and, to Katerina's horror, the puppet stood on its own. It jerked forward, walking across the stage with a plotter's gait. Its painted eyes seemed aware, scanning the gloom. How did you learn to do this? Katerina demanded, her voice trembling. You bring them to life, but why? What do you gain from these puppet shadows? Hester gently touched the puppet's carved face, and it settled next to her like a devoted pet. Power, naturally, but I do not do it solely for power's sake. I grew to love the artistry of it, the swirl of the strings, the ephemeral dance. The shadows are unstoppable assassins when molded into these wooden shells. They can move through darkness, slip under doors, vanish into corners, and when they kill, they do so swiftly. Katerina swallowed the knot in her throat. You used them to kill? That's why travelers vanished? Inside Hester's eyes, a spark burned. Our audiences were enthralled, but some grew suspicious of me. They threatened my craft. Others offered themselves as patrons, but in truth, they simply wanted to wrest control of my secrets. I had no choice but to protect my art. A wind gusted across the stage, stirring the ragged curtains. Katerina sensed heavy things swirling in the shadows, as though a dozen pairs of eyes watched from the wings. Was she truly alone with Hester, or was something else lurking here, enticed by the puppet mistress's presence? Hester smiled as though she could read her thoughts. You're not alone. My silent watchers observe, ready to spring into action should the need arise. But do not fear yet. I sense you came not as a threat, but as a seeker of knowledge. Katerina nodded mutely, unable to tear her gaze from the living puppet at Hester's side. The wooden figure cocked its head, regarding her with that unnerving glass stare. Its shadow quivered on the stage, vaguely untethered from the lantern's angle, as though it had a mind of its own. Let me show you the heart of this craft, Hester said. She led Katerina behind the tattered curtain to a small backstage corridor that was even gloomier than the stage. Here, the swirling pattern was carved into the floor, inlaid with obsidian, forming a labyrinth of spirals and runes. The lost souls are channeled through these symbols, she explained. Their ephemeral energies fuse with the wood. My duty is to shape that essence. Katerina couldn't hide her fascination, fear, and a peculiar awe. The corridor's walls were hung with marionettes in various states of completion, some missing arms, others lacking faces, all suspended on hooks. The slim, ghost-like shapes of their shadows twisted in the flickering lamplight, as though yearning to be made whole. Hester paused before a workbench littered with chisels, brushes, and jars of black resin. A half-carved puppet head lay in the center, smooth as bone. "My father began teaching me," she said softly, "but he lacked the focus for real artistry. I took his knowledge and surpassed him. The illusions became real under my hand. I wove the intangible into tangible form. I delivered what no other puppet master could." She tapped the carved wood with a fingertip. "When I decided to harness the shadows, not just for performance, but for protection, that was when fear set in among my so-called colleagues." Katerina flinched at the macabre array of dolls. "Is that who you are, then? An artist gone astray? Or a monster?" Hester's expression clouded. "The line is thin, but illusions can be weapons, or they can be wonders. It is the use that defines them. My illusions became too potent, too real for others to stomach. Those who tried to stop me discovered how deadly these marionettes can be." At that, she turned abruptly into an adjoining chamber. Reluctantly, Katerina followed. Inside, the room was outfitted almost like a chapel. A large black tapestry hung on one wall, embroidered with curling sigils that matched the stage design. Standing candelabras burned with ectoplasmic flame, a faint violet hue that tinted everything with an otherworldly glow. The flickering light made Katerina's shadow stretch ominously across the floor. She noticed how that shadow seemed to lengthen on its own, and she hastily stepped away from the candelabras. The puppet that had followed them onto the stage now knelt at the room's center, arms folded behind its back, head bowed. It looked like a penitent soldier awaiting orders. From one of the tapestried pockets, Hester drew out slender black cords that seemed more like living tendrils than rope. "This is how I bind the shadows to the wood. These threads sink into the puppet's core and tether it to my will. Once bound, it is unstoppable, unless I choose to dissolve the connection." Katerina stared at the cords, transfixed. They writhed in Hester's grasp, seeming to whisper. "What if the marionettes break free? Could they turn on you?" A small laugh tore from Hester's throat. "They wouldn't dare. I've woven my blood, my essence, into these cords. The synergy of puppet and master is absolute. Of course, that synergy must be carefully maintained. The shadows hunger for freedom, any chance to slip their leash, which is why each puppet must feed on occasion. If they lack fresh essence, the darkness in them will dwindle and fade." Katerina felt an icy swirl in her gut. Feed on people? Hester offered a knowing smile. A mere touch of living soul, or a taste of fear, can keep them sustained. When the marionette shadows slither across a victim, they draw out that intangible spark that stokes mortal life. I used to resent the practice, but with time I grew accustomed to the necessity. Katerina swallowed a protest. She realized that the rumors were likely true. These living shadows killed travelers who stumbled too close, feeding upon them, leaving behind empty shells. She tried to steady herself. Her curiosity had brought her here, but now the knowledge weighed heavily. She measured Hester with careful eyes. "Have you never considered releasing these trapped souls? Perhaps letting them rest instead of binding them to your designs?" Hester's face hardened. "Release them? I am their salvation. The alternative is a dismal half-life, wandering in emptiness. I grant them purpose. I harness their energies, give them form and direction." She inhaled deeply, her posture rigid. "But I see your concern is genuine, traveler. You do not come from a place of malice. What if I just want to leave? Katerina asked quietly. To write about what I've learned, and never speak of your location? Hester's eyes narrowed, and Katerina felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Shadows thickened in the corners, swirling like dense fog, charged with threat. You think I'd let you walk away? Perhaps you fail to appreciate what I'm offering. This is an opportunity few mortals ever receive, understanding the artistry behind the illusions. Katerina's heart thudded. She backed toward the door, but one of the puppets, a tall, gaunt figure with elongated arms, materialized from the shadows, blocking her exit. Its wooden face was blank, yet the aura of menace was unmistakable. No, no, Hester crooned, advancing with the black cords in hand. Don't run. The shadows feed off fear. Katerina felt her terror surge. Darkness flickered at the edges of her vision, as though the candles guttered in the breeze. She realized that hiding her fear was crucial, lest the marionettes sense it like sharks smelling blood. She modulated her voice. Believe me, I am intrigued. I understand your art is unique. Perhaps I should remain a while to see more. Desperation threaded through her words, but she struggled to mask it in measured tones. Hester tilted her head, measuring Katerina's response. If you truly wish to learn, then kneel before the tapestry. Let me see your resolve. Katerina's mind raced. She could kneel and risk losing herself to that swirling darkness, or she could try to fight, even though fighting seemed futile. Her eyes flicked to the puppet guarding the door. The thing was unbelievably fast and strong, no doubt. She could see the shadow that bound it flicker unnaturally at its wrists and ankles, like captive smoke. Tentatively, she took a step toward the tapestry, feigning acquiescence. Somewhere deep inside, she resolved to seize the moment, if an opening presented itself. She forced her trembling knees to bend in a semblance of compliance. Hester came to stand behind her, whispering arcane words. The tapestry's embroidered sigils seemed to swirl, and Katerina felt a faint pull at her own shadow, as though an invisible current drew it forward. She had to clamp down on her panic to avoid giving in. She half closed her eyes, searching for a plan. Then, in a flash, she remembered the lantern. She had set it down upon entering this room, near the threshold of the corridor. If she could reach it, maybe she could scour the darkness with its flame. Perhaps it could disrupt the shadows that Hester commanded. It was a desperate thought, but the only one she had. Hester's voice rose and fell, weaving what sounded like a litany. The puppet behind Katerina let out a clicking rattle, shifting its stance. A second puppet drifted closer from the side, jerkily dropping to all fours, head lolling with sinister intent. Katerina realized she'd be surrounded soon. Her pulse hammered. She inched her fingers under the folds of her cloak and felt the hilt of her small belt knife. No ordinary blade, but an iron dagger said to repel malevolent spirits. She prayed it still held that protective, blessed aura. Hester lifted the black cords, bringing them down to wrap around Katerina's wrists. The cords coiled with a cold, slithering sensation, as though alive. The second they touched her skin, Katerina felt a harsh tug at her essence. An invisible weight pressed upon her chest as though something was attempting to siphon the heat from her bones. Spots danced in her vision. With a defiant cry, she yanked back. The cords parted for an instant. She spun and slashed upward with her dagger. For the briefest heartbeat, she saw shock in Hester's eyes. The blade caught the cords and severed them with a crackling sizzle. At once, sparks of dark energy exploded in the air like black fireworks. Hester recoiled, letting out a short hiss of pain. The puppets lunged. Katerina rolled to the side. The gaunt marionette unleashed a flailing strike, but she ducked beneath its arms. She grabbed the lantern from the floor, fumbling it upright. The living puppet advanced, slashing at her with wooden fingers sharpened into claws. She kicked a foot forward, smashing it squarely in the chest. The puppet staggered. Swiftly, she flicked open the lantern shutter, allowing the flame to blaze with renewed vigor. Light flooded the small chamber. The swirling tapestries and runes flickered as though in protest. One puppet shrieked in a weird, strangled pitch. Its shadow, pinned by the glow, seemed to writhe in agony. Another puppet melted into the corridor's gloom, avoiding the direct glare. Hester recovered from the shock, her face twisted with fury. "You do not understand the forces you toy with. Put that flame away." The swirl of darkness around her thickened, fueling her presence. She raised a hand, shaping the swirling blackness into a skeletal silhouette that leaped from the wall and snatched at the lantern's handle. Still, it couldn't extinguish the flame entirely. Katerina realized she had to move fast. She shoved past the shrieking puppet. Its wooden claws scraped across her shoulder, tearing fabric, drawing a rivulet of blood. But adrenaline surged, and she bolted down the corridor, lantern lighting the way. Behind her, she heard the frantic scraping of puppet limbs and Hester's furious commands. She emerged onto the stage, breath ragged. She turned the lantern's beam on the swirling designs on the floor. The black sigils seemed to shift malevolently, as if resisting the light. She realized she might be able to disrupt the pattern, break the flow of power binding the shadows. Desperate, she smashed the lamp down onto the floorboards. Oil spilled across the swirling glyphs, flames erupting in a savage burst. Fire blossomed, dancing over the black pigment. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid. The stage design cracked and peeled beneath the flames' onslaught. Screeching howls filled the theater, and from behind the curtain, Katerina heard Hester cursing in raw fury. She dashed toward the exit. The puppets descended in pursuit. One vaulted from the balcony, landing in a crouch, its eyes glowing with stolen shadows. It lunged for her with superhuman speed. Gritting her teeth, Katerina rolled aside, feeling the sear of flaming debris. With her iron dagger, she sliced across the puppet's strings. Dark fluid hissed from the severed cords. The puppet collapsed in a chattering spasm, as though the life had been yanked from it. Fire spread quickly, devouring the rotted theater. A portion of the rafters groaned, threatening to cave in. Through the haze, Katerina glimpsed Hester emerging from the corridor, dark coat swirling in the rising heat. Her silver hair whipped around her face, and a monstrous silhouette clung to her shoulders. Some large, multi-limbed shadow. It glowed with unearthly runes. The force of her anger radiated, and a wind howled through the auditorium, as though responding to her will. "You have destroyed my masterpiece," she screamed above the roar, her voice cracked with heartbreak. "You will pay for this betrayal." Katerina clambered over a burning beam, coughing from the thick smoke. Behind her, the living shadows cracked like whips. She felt something seize her ankle and looked down to see a puppet's charred arm pulling at her. She kicked frantically, lodging her boot into its wooden torso. The puppet hissed and tumbled away, into the flames devouring the stage. Arcs of black lightning flared from Hester's fingertips. She chanted, calling to the swirling darkness overhead. The intangible shape that clung to her shoulders launched itself forward, attempting to dive into Katerina's shadow. Katerina leapt out of the way at the last second, brandishing the lantern's still burning handle like a torch. The flame sputtered, nearly doused by the swirl of blackness. The shadow creature spun back to Hester, and the puppet master advanced, crossing the stage in eerily fluid strides. "I won't let you leave with knowledge of my secrets." She flung out an arm, sending another barrage of smoky tendrils to entangle Katerina's legs. The building was collapsing around both of them. The seats were ablaze, the ceiling peeled away by the inferno, letting sheets of rain pour in from above. Sparks danced in the downpour. The swirling black sigils that once harnessed trapped souls broke apart under the scorching flames. Terrible shrieks, whether from the marionettes or lost spirits, echoed, crescendoing in the storm. Through the chaos, Katerina kept low, searching for a path to the entrance. Every way was wreathed in flame or blocked by collapsing scenery. She heard movement behind her, two more puppets lurching forth from behind the set pieces. She realized that though the stage was in flames, these marionettes seemed to shrug off the heat. Driven by relentless shadow power, Hester pointed again, summoning a swirl of monstrous forms from the corners of the stage. They swept in a black wave toward Katerina. But just as that wave converged, The roof overhead buckled with a thunderous crack. Burning timbers plummeted to the floor, unleashing an avalanche of sparks and shattered beams. Hester was forced to dodge aside. The black wave of illusions scattered, swirling around her protectively. Seizing her chance, Katerina dashed to the side door, the one she recalled glimpsing upon first entering the building. She braced her shoulder into the warped wood. The door gave way with a splintering crunch, opening to the swirling rain outside. She tumbled down the steps, battered by the storm and the shock of cold air. She turned, gazing back. The ancient theater was engulfed in a pillar of black smoke, shot with red flame, spitting embers into the night. A portion of the roof caved in, sending a blast of sparks up into the storm clouds. Katerina's lungs burned from the smoke. She staggered backward, letting the rain wash the soot from her face. In the flickering light of the inferno, she saw Hester outlined in the main entrance, half her face lit in a sinister glow. The puppet master gripped the doorframe, silver hair plastered to her skull by the rain, eyes gleaming with raw hatred. Behind her, the marionettes jerked and spasmed in the flames, or collapsed in black silhouettes, dissolving into drifting soot. Shadows twisted around her, spewing unearthly shrieks. "You can't destroy me so easily!" Hester's voice rang out. It carried both sorrow and rage. "I am the mistress of shadows." She took one step forward, but a torrent of burning debris fell behind her, sealing the threshold with a roar of sparks. She stared at Katerina through the swirl of luminescent ashes. Then the wave of flame reached them, and Hester's form vanished in the rolling smoke. Rain hammered in loud torrents, sizzling against the blazing husk of the theater. For a few heartbeats, Katerina stood there, numb to the bone, unsure of her next move. The stench of burning wood and the lingering traces of unholy power made her skin crawl. She finally turned away, stumbling along the deserted road. The storm soaked her cloak and clothes, but at least it erased the soot and blood. She limped past the broken signboards, keeping her eyes peeled. She feared at any moment she might glimpse a twisted shadow puppet lurch up from behind a wall, or see Hester's vengeful face in a flash of lightning. But the road lay empty, shrouded in the night's gloom. The only flicker behind her was the dying orange light of the fire, reflected in the rain. Perhaps Hester had truly perished in that doomed inferno. Or perhaps not. Katerina understood that shadows could survive in unlikely corners, that the intangible energies might cling to life so long as darkness remained in the world. Still, she had to keep moving, to escape the haunted crossroads before dawn. Any lingering curiosity about the puppet master's secrets was thoroughly drowned in the horror she had witnessed. Distant thunder rolled. As her footsteps echoed on the sodden cobblestones, she felt a pang of sorrow for the souls trapped within that theater. She remembered the hush of the auditorium, the swirl of black sigils, the sensation of her own shadow pulling away from her. She wondered how many more times Hester had performed those rites, coaxing ephemeral echoes into her wooden puppets, forging unstoppable assassins. She paused once, looking over her shoulder at the glare on the horizon where the ancient building burned. A final silhouette seemed to flicker in the flames, maybe a trick of her rattled mind. It looked like a dancer twirling, shadow strings guiding the moves. Then the form dissolved with a gust of black smoke. A chill breeze raked across her, carrying the faint smell of ash. She turned away for good. Somewhere in the night, a crow cawed, and the wind hissed through the twisted branches overhead. She forced herself onward into the darkness, guided only by the fleeting glow of distant lightning. Though she escaped with her life, she could not entirely shake the sense of being followed by a phantom. Each time her lantern's glow cast a second shadow ahead of her, her heart leapt, for she knew that the puppet master who tamed living shadows would not die so easily. In hidden corners of the world, flickering shapes might regroup, reassemble their severed cords. Another battered trunk, another ramshackle stage, might one day be found. And from the gloom, killer marionettes might once more slip into the unsuspecting populace, each wooden joint bound to a silent, hungry shadow. Even as Katerina hurried onward through the rain, she tried not to look back, yet in the corners of her eyes, She swore she saw a slender black string trailing behind her own shadow, thin as a whisper, dark as midnight, awaiting the command of a distant puppet master whose vengeance was only just beginning.